The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as Sarah Mitchell, the head of the royal jewelry collection, walked briskly down the corridor. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing through the grand hallway. She had been working at the palace for 15 years, but today felt different. Today she carried news that would shake the very foundations of the royal household. Sarah clutched a leather folder tightly against her chest. Inside were photographs and documents that revealed something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. 3 pieces of Queen Elizabeth's most precious jewelry had gone missing from the secure vault, and the security cameras showed no evidence of forced entry. The mystery was deeper than anyone could imagine. As she approached the private study where King Charles was having his morning tea, Sarah's hands trembled slightly. She had discovered the missing jewelry during her routine monthly inventory check. The Vladimir tiara, the flame lily brooch, and the diamond Riviere necklace were nowhere to be found. These weren't just any pieces of jewelry. They were worth millions of pounds and held immense sentimental value to the late Queen Elizabeth. King Charles looked up from his newspaper as Sarah entered the room. His face immediately showed concern when he saw her expression. "Sarah, you look troubled. What brings you here so early?" Sarah took a deep breath and opened her folder. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid I have some disturbing news. During yesterday's inventory check, I discovered that 3 significant pieces from Her late Majesty's collection are missing." She placed the photographs on the mahogany desk in front of him. The king's face went pale as he examined the images. These were pieces his mother had worn on special occasions, pieces that held memories of state dinners, royal weddings, and historic moments. "How is this possible, Sarah?" "The vault is supposed to be the most secure location in the palace." Sarah nodded gravely. "That's what makes this so puzzling, Your Majesty. There are no signs of break-in. The electronic locks show no unauthorized access. The security cameras reveal nothing suspicious. It's as if the jewelry simply vanished into thin air." King Charles stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The weight of this discovery pressed heavily on his shoulders. These weren't just valuable objects. They were part of Britain's heritage, part of his family's legacy. "Who else knows about this?" "Only myself and Detective Inspector James Crawford from the Metropolitan Police's Art and Antiques Unit. I called him immediately after making the discovery. He's conducting a preliminary investigation, but he insisted that we keep this matter strictly confidential until we understand the scope of the situation." The king turned back to face Sarah. "And the staff who have access to the vault?" Sarah consulted her notes. "There are only 5 people with the highest level of clearance. Myself, the deputy keeper of the privy purse, the head of palace security, and..." She paused, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. "And who else, Sarah?" "Queen Camilla, Your Majesty. She received full access when she became queen consort. The system shows she visited the vault 3 times in the past month." The silence in the room was deafening. King Charles felt his world tilting slightly. Camilla had been interested in the jewelry collection, often asking questions about various pieces and their histories. She had even mentioned wanting to wear some of his mother's jewelry for upcoming state functions. But surely there had to be an innocent explanation. "What exactly did the access logs show about her visits?" the king asked, his voice carefully controlled. Sarah flipped through her documents. The first visit was 2 weeks ago, lasting about 45 minutes. The second was a week ago for 30 minutes, and the third was just 3 days ago. Each time she was alone, which is unusual. Normally, staff members accompany anyone entering the vault, but as queen consort, she has the privilege of private access. King Charles rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. "Has Detective Crawford spoken to anyone yet?" "He interviewed the security staff yesterday evening. Everyone's story checks out. The guards on duty during Queen Camilla's visits confirm she entered and exited at the recorded times. However, Detective Crawford did mention something interesting. The security guard who was on duty during her last visit noticed she seemed different when she left." "Different how?" "According to Guard Peterson, she appeared nervous and was carrying a small velvet pouch that she didn't have when she entered. When he politely asked if everything was all right, she said she was just feeling unwell and hurried away." The king felt his heart racing. This couldn't be happening. Not Camilla. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps she had borrowed the pieces for cleaning or appraisal. Maybe she wanted to surprise him by wearing them at an upcoming event. But why the secrecy? Sarah continued. Detective Crawford wants to interview Queen Camilla today. He's being very discreet, but he says this is standard procedure. Everyone with access needs to be questioned. Absolutely not, King Charles said firmly. We cannot have my wife subjected to police interrogation like a common criminal. There must be another way to handle this. Your Majesty, with respect, Detective Crawford emphasized that delaying the investigation could compromise the case. If word of this gets out to the media before we have answers, the scandal could be devastating for the monarchy. King Charles knew Sarah was right, but the thought of Camilla being questioned by police made him feel sick. He had seen how the press could destroy royal family members. His first wife, Diana, had suffered terribly from media scrutiny. He couldn't let the same thing happen to Camilla. Give me until this evening, the king said finally. I want to speak with Camilla privately first. If she has the jewelry, I'm sure there's an innocent explanation. If she doesn't, then we'll proceed with the formal investigation. Sarah looked worried. Your Majesty, Detective Crawford was very clear about the timeline. Every hour we delay gives whoever took the jewelry more time to hide or dispose of the evidence. One day, Sarah. That's all I'm asking for. Meanwhile, have the detective continue investigating all other possibilities. Check with jewelers, auction houses, insurance companies. Maybe someone is trying to sell replicas, or maybe there's been some administrative error. As Sarah left the study, King Charles slumped back into his chair. His mind raced with questions and fears. How would he even bring this up with Camilla? What if she had taken the jewelry? What if she hadn't? Either way, their marriage would never be the same. The trust they had built over decades could be shattered by this single conversation. Outside, the palace continued its daily routine, unaware that a crisis was brewing in its very heart. The missing jewelry was more than just a theft. It was a threat to everything the royal family represented, and at the center of it all was the woman King Charles loved most in the world. Queen Camilla sat in her private sitting room, absently stirring her afternoon tea while staring out at the palace gardens. She had been feeling increasingly anxious over the past few days, and she couldn't quite put her finger on why. There was something in the air, a tension she couldn't shake. The staff seemed to be whispering more than usual, and even Charles had been acting strangely that morning. Her phone buzzed with a message from her private secretary about the evening's schedule, but Camilla found herself unable to concentrate on the mundane details of royal duties. Her mind kept drifting to the jewelry vault and her recent visits there. She had been spending time looking through Elizabeth's collection, trying to understand the history behind each piece, wanting to honor her predecessor's memory by wearing the jewelry appropriately. The truth was, Camilla still felt like an outsider sometimes. Despite being married to Charles for nearly 2 decades, despite being queen consort, she sometimes felt the weight of comparison to the beloved Queen Elizabeth. The late queen had been such an icon, so naturally regal. Camilla often worried she would never measure up in the eyes of the British people. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting to see her lady-in-waiting with the evening's correspondence. Instead, King Charles entered, his face grave and his usual warm smile absent. Camilla immediately sensed something was seriously wrong. In all their years together, she had learned to read his moods perfectly, and right now he looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. Charles, darling, what's wrong? You look absolutely dreadful, she said, setting down her teacup and rising to meet him. He closed the door behind him and walked to the window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. This was his thinking posture, the way he stood when he was wrestling with difficult decisions. Camilla felt her stomach knot with anxiety. Camilla, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, he said without turning around. Of course, Charles. You're frightening me. What's happened? He finally turned to face her, and she saw pain in his eyes that she hadn't seen since the difficult early days of their relationship. 3 pieces of my mother's jewelry have gone missing from the vault. Very valuable pieces. The security logs show that you've been the only person to visit the vault recently. Camilla felt the blood drain from her face. She sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly feeling weak. Missing? What do you mean missing? The Vladimir tiara, the flame lily brooch, and the diamond Riviere necklace. Sarah discovered they were gone during the monthly inventory. The police have been called in, and Detective Crawford wants to question everyone with access to the vault. Charles's voice was steady, but Camilla could hear the underlying tremor of emotion. You think I took them? The question came out as barely a whisper. Camilla felt as if the room was spinning around her. I don't know what to think, Camilla. I know there must be an explanation, but the facts are very concerning. The guard said you left the vault carrying a velvet pouch 3 days ago. You appeared nervous. These pieces disappeared sometime in the past week, and you're the only one who had access during that time. Camilla's mind raced. She remembered that day clearly now. She had been feeling emotional, looking through Elizabeth's jewelry and thinking about how she would never be able to fill the late Queen's shoes. She had taken a small velvet pouch from the vault, but it wasn't what Charles thought. Charles, sit down, please. I need to explain something to you, and you're not going to like it. He moved to the chair across from her, his expression guarded. Go on. Camilla took a shaky breath. I did take something from the vault 3 days ago. But it wasn't your mother's jewelry. It was... She paused, struggling to find the words. It was a letter. A letter she wrote to me before she died. Charles frowned. A letter? What letter? There are no personal letters stored in the jewelry vault. There is one, hidden in the back of the case where she kept her everyday rings. I found it during my first visit to the vault. It was addressed to me, sealed, with instructions that it should only be opened after her death and only if I became queen consort. The color drained from Charles's face. You've known about this letter for weeks and you didn't tell me? Tears welled up in Camilla's eyes. I was afraid, Charles. Afraid of what it might say. Afraid of how it might change things between us. Your mother and I, our relationship was complicated. We found peace in her final years, but there was always this distance, this formality. What did the letter say? Camilla reached into her handbag and pulled out a small cream-colored envelope with the royal seal. Her hands shook as she held it. I haven't opened it yet. I took it because I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else finding it first. I needed time to decide whether to read it or destroy it. Charles stared at the letter, his emotions warring across his face. May I? He asked, extending his hand. Camilla hesitated for a moment, then handed him the envelope. Whatever it says, Charles, please remember that I love you. I've always loved you, and I've tried my best to be worthy of this role. With careful fingers, Charles opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. His eyes scanned the elegant handwriting, and Camilla watched his expression change from suspicion to confusion to something that looked like relief, mixed with sadness. She knew she was dying when she wrote this, he said softly. Listen to this. My dear Camilla, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you have become queen consort. I want you to know that I understand the sacrifices you have made for Charles and for the crown. I know our relationship was not always easy, but I came to respect your devotion to my son. The jewelry in this vault represents not just wealth, but memories and history. I trust you to carry on that legacy with dignity. There are 3 pieces I want you to have immediately upon my death. Pieces that belong to my own mother and grandmother. Consider them a wedding gift that I was never able to give you properly. Camilla's tears were flowing freely now. She wanted me to have jewelry? But which pieces? Charles continued reading. The Vladimir tiara, which I wore on my wedding day, should be yours for state occasions. The diamond Riviere necklace belonged to my mother and would suit you beautifully. And the flame lily brooch was my grandmother's favorite piece. She always said it brought good luck to the women who wore it. I ask only that you wear these pieces with pride and remember that you are now part of our family's story. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Camilla's quiet crying. Charles set the letter down and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. So you didn't know about her wishes regarding the jewelry? He asked gently. I had no idea. I've been so worried about taking anything that wasn't explicitly given to me. I didn't want people to think I was being greedy or presumptuous. I thought the missing jewelry was a coincidence, that maybe Sarah had made a mistake in her inventory. Charles pulled her into his arms. Oh, Camilla, why didn't you tell me about the letter sooner? We could have avoided all this worry and suspicion. I was scared, she whispered against his shoulder. Scared that even after death, Elizabeth might have had harsh words for me. Scared that it might contain secrets that would hurt you or damage the monarchy. I just needed time to work up the courage. As they held each other, both felt a mixture of relief and new concern. The mystery of the missing jewelry was solved, but now they had to deal with the police investigation, the palace staff's suspicions, and the potential media storm if word of this got out. The royal family had weathered many scandals, but the idea of the Queen Consort being suspected of theft could be devastating to the monarchy's reputation. Detective Inspector James Crawford arrived at Buckingham Palace just as the afternoon rain began to fall. He had been investigating art and jewelry thefts for over 20 years, but this case was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The missing pieces were worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes, and the location of the theft was one of the most secure places in the United Kingdom. As he walked through the palace corridors, escorted by Sarah Mitchell, Crawford mentally reviewed what he knew so far. 3 priceless pieces of jewelry had vanished from a vault that showed no signs of forced entry. Only 5 people had access, and all had been accounted for except for the Queen Consort's recent visits. The timing was suspicious, but Crawford had learned not to jump to conclusions too quickly in his career. Detective Crawford, before we proceed with the interviews, I should tell you that His Majesty has requested to speak with you privately, Sarah said as they approached the investigation room that had been set up for him. Crawford nodded. He had expected this. Royal cases always came with political complications, and he suspected the king would try to protect his wife from scrutiny. Of course. Where would His Majesty like to meet? 20 minutes later, Crawford found himself in the king's private study, facing a man who looked like he had aged years in the past day. King Charles gestured for him to sit, but remained standing himself, clearly agitated. Detective Crawford, I want to be completely transparent with you about this situation, the king began. My wife did not steal those pieces of jewelry. Crawford pulled out his notebook. Your Majesty, I appreciate your confidence in the Queen Consort, but I'm sure you understand that I need to follow proper investigative procedures. Of course, but there's something you need to know. The king walked to his desk and picked up the letter that Camilla had hidden for weeks. My mother left specific instructions for these jewelry pieces to be given to my wife upon becoming Queen Consort. We discovered this letter just an hour ago. Crawford examined the letter carefully, noting the royal seal, the handwriting, and the date. This is quite significant, Your Majesty. But I'm curious why this information wasn't available sooner. Surely such important documents would be catalogued and accessible. King Charles's jaw tightened slightly. The letter was hidden in the jewelry vault by my mother. My wife discovered it during one of her visits but was hesitant to read it immediately. She only opened it today when I confronted her about the missing pieces. So Queen Camilla knew about the existence of this letter before the jewelry went missing? Yes, but she didn't know its contents. She was actually afraid to read it, concerned about what it might contain. Crawford made notes as he considered this new information. In his experience, the most obvious explanation was usually the correct one, but royal cases often had layers of complexity that ordinary thefts didn't possess. Your Majesty, if your mother intended for these pieces to go to Queen Camilla, why weren't they transferred through proper channels after the funeral? Because no one knew about her wishes except my mother herself. The letter was her way of ensuring that her intentions were honored, but only after Camilla had officially become Queen Consort. Crawford nodded thoughtfully. I'll need to verify the authenticity of this letter with handwriting experts and examine the vault location where it was hidden. In the meantime, I'd like to interview Queen Camilla to understand the timeline of her vault visits and what exactly she removed. The king's expression hardened. Detective, I must insist that any interview with my wife be conducted with the utmost discretion. The very suggestion that she might be involved in theft could be catastrophic for the monarchy if it became public. I understand your concerns, Your Majesty, but I have a duty to conduct a thorough investigation. The good news is that if this letter is authentic, and if Queen Camilla has the jewelry in her possession, then we may have solved this case already. An hour later, Crawford sat across from Queen Camilla in her private sitting room. She appeared nervous but composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The king sat beside her, his protective presence clearly providing her with comfort. Your Majesty, can you walk me through your visits to the jewelry vault over the past month? Crawford asked gently. Camilla took a breath before responding. My first visit was 2 weeks ago. I wanted to familiarize myself with the collection, to understand the history behind the pieces. That's when I discovered the letter hidden behind my late mother-in-law's ring case. What did you do when you found the letter? I left it there initially. I was quite shaken, to be honest. The idea that Queen Elizabeth had left me a personal message was overwhelming. I went back a week later to look at it again, but I still couldn't bring myself to open it. Crawford made notes. And the third visit 3 days ago? That's when I finally took the letter. I'd been feeling so anxious about it, and I knew that if anyone else discovered it during an inventory check, it would raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer. During any of these visits, did you remove any jewelry pieces? Camilla shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. I wouldn't dare take anything without proper authorization. I've been so careful to respect all protocols since becoming queen consort. Crawford consulted his notes. The security guard mentioned you were carrying a small velvet pouch when you left the vault 3 days ago. That's correct. I used one of the small pouches from the vault to carry the letter. I was worried about damaging it. Queen Camilla, do you have any idea where the 3 missing jewelry pieces might be? She looked at her husband before answering. Based on the letter we found, I believe my late mother-in-law may have moved them herself before her death, intending for them to be given to me at the appropriate time. But I don't know where they are now, Crawford frowned. This was an interesting theory, but it raised new questions. If Queen Elizabeth moved the pieces herself, who would she have trusted with that task? And why would they not have come forward when the pieces were discovered missing? King Charles leaned forward. My mother was very private about her final wishes. She may have entrusted someone with specific instructions that they're following to the letter. Do you have any ideas about who that might be? The king and queen exchanged glances. There were several people who were particularly close to my mother in her final months, the king said slowly. Her private secretary, Sir Edward Young, her personal dresser, Angela Kelly, and her longtime friend and racing manager, John Warren. Crawford made note of these names. I'll need to interview all of them. In the meantime, I'd like permission to have handwriting experts examine this letter to confirm its authenticity. Of course, Queen Camilla said. I want this matter resolved as much as anyone. The idea that I might be suspected of theft is mortifying. As Crawford prepared to leave, he reflected on how this case was evolving. What had seemed like a straightforward theft investigation was becoming something much more complex. If Queen Elizabeth had indeed orchestrated the removal of these pieces as part of her final wishes, then they were dealing with a posthumous gift rather than a crime. But until they found the jewelry and confirmed the letter's authenticity, everyone remained under suspicion. The detective had one more stop to make before calling it a day. The palace's head of security, Commander Patricia Hayes, had asked to speak with him privately. She had mentioned something about unusual activity in the weeks before Queen Elizabeth's death that might be relevant to the case. As Crawford walked through the palace corridors toward the security office, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mystery was far from over. Royal secrets had a way of creating more questions than answers, and he suspected that the missing jewelry was just the tip of the iceberg. Commander Patricia Hayes had been head of palace security for 12 years, and in that time, she had seen every kind of crisis the royal family could face. From terrorist threats to paparazzi invasions, she had handled them all with military precision. But the missing jewelry case was testing her in ways she hadn't expected. As she waited for Detective Crawford in her office, she reviewed the security footage from the weeks leading up to Queen Elizabeth's death. There was something she had noticed during her initial review, something that hadn't seemed significant at the time but now felt crucial. In the final weeks of the late Queen's life, there had been several unusual movements of staff and visitors that broke normal palace protocols. Crawford entered her office promptly at 5 o'clock, looking tired but determined. Commander Hayes, thank you for agreeing to meet. I understand you have some information that might be relevant to our investigation. Patricia gestured for him to sit and pulled up several files on her computer. Detective, what I'm about to show you might change how you view this entire case. 3 weeks before Her late Majesty passed away, she made several requests that seemed odd at the time but make more sense now. She turned her monitor so Crawford could see the security logs. Look at this. On September 15th, Queen Elizabeth requested private meetings with 3 individuals outside her usual routine. Sir Edward Young, her private secretary Angela Kelly, her personal dresser, and John Warren, her racing manager. Crawford studied the logs. These are the same 3 people the king mentioned as being particularly close to his mother in her final months. Exactly. But here's what's interesting. After each of these meetings, the individuals were escorted to different parts of the palace by the Queen's personal protection officers. Sir Edward went to the Royal Archives. Angela Kelly went to the Queen's private apartments. and John Warren went to the safe room where some of the Queen's most personal possessions were stored. Crawford leaned forward, his interest piqued. Do we know what they were doing in these locations? Patricia pulled up another screen. That's where it gets complicated. The Queen had given specific instructions that these activities were not to be recorded or monitored. She invoked her personal privacy privileges, which meant we had to disable cameras and remove security personnel from those areas during their visits. That's highly unusual, isn't it? Extremely. In my 12 years here, I can count on one hand the number of times those privacy privileges were used. The Queen was always very conscious of security protocols. Crawford made detailed notes. How long did each person spend in their respective locations? Patricia consulted her logs. Sir Edward was in the archives for 2 hours. Angela Kelly spent about 90 minutes in the Queen's apartments. John Warren was in the safe room for approximately 45 minutes. And this all happened in the same week, within 3 days of each other. What's more, the Queen specifically requested that these meetings and activities be kept confidential, even from King Charles. She said she was handling some personal matters and would explain everything in due time. Crawford felt a chill run down his spine. This was beginning to look like Queen Elizabeth had orchestrated something complex in her final weeks, something that involved the 3 people closest to her and required absolute secrecy. Commander, do you think it's possible that the Queen moved the jewelry herself as part of whatever she was planning? It's not only possible, Detective, it's probable. The Queen had access to everything in the palace. She could have moved those pieces anywhere, given them to anyone, without it showing up on our regular security protocols. But why the secrecy? Why not handle this through normal channels? Patricia was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with something. Detective, what I'm about to tell you is based on observation and intuition, not concrete evidence. In the Queen's final weeks, she seemed to be settling accounts, so to speak. She was tying up loose ends, making peace with people and ensuring that certain wishes would be carried out after her death. You think she was planning how her legacy would be handled? More than that. I think she was trying to heal old wounds. The relationship between the Queen and Queen Camilla had been strained for many years. Despite the public reconciliation, there was always an underlying tension. I believe the Queen was trying to make amends in her own way. Crawford stood and walked to the window, processing this information. If Commander Hayes was right, then they weren't investigating a theft at all. They were uncovering a carefully planned posthumous gesture of reconciliation. Commander, I need to speak with these 3 individuals immediately. Can you arrange meetings? I've already taken the liberty of contacting them. Sir Edward and John Warren can meet with you tomorrow morning. However, there's a complication with Angela Kelly. What kind of complication? Patricia's expression grew troubled. She's been missing for 2 days. Her family contacted us yesterday when she failed to show up for her usual Sunday dinner. Her apartment appears to have been hastily packed, and several neighbors reported seeing a taxi pick her up with several suitcases early Friday morning. Crawford felt his pulse quicken, right around the time the missing jewelry was discovered. The timing is very suspicious. Angela had access to the Queen's private apartments, including areas where jewelry was sometimes stored temporarily. If anyone knew about the Queen's final plans regarding the missing pieces, it would be her. Has anyone checked her financial records? Looked for airline bookings or hotel reservations? We began a preliminary search when her family reported her missing, but we haven't found anything concrete yet. Angela was always very private about her personal life. Crawford rubbed his temples, feeling the complexity of the case multiplying by the hour. Commander, I need everything you have on Angela Kelly. Employment records, security clearances, personal references. I also need a complete list of everyone she interacted with in the weeks before Queen Elizabeth's death. I'll have that information for you within the hour. Detective, there's one more thing you should know. Angela Kelly wasn't just the Queen's dresser. She was one of the few people the Queen trusted completely. They had developed a genuine friendship over the years, and the Queen often confided in her about personal matters. So if the Queen was planning to give those jewelry pieces to Queen Camilla, Angela would have known about it? Without question. Angela helped the Queen choose jewelry for every important occasion. She knew the history and significance of every piece in the collection. As Crawford prepared to leave, his phone buzzed with a message from the forensics team. The handwriting experts had finished their preliminary analysis of the letter Queen Camilla had found. The results were conclusive. It was definitely written by Queen Elizabeth, and the paper and ink were consistent with materials used in her private correspondence. This confirmation shifted the entire investigation. The letter was genuine, which meant Queen Elizabeth had indeed intended for Queen Camilla to have the 3 missing pieces. But if that was the case, where were they now? And why had Angela Kelly disappeared right when the jewelry was discovered missing? Crawford had a sinking feeling that Angela Kelly held the key to solving this mystery. The question was whether she had followed the Queen's final instructions faithfully, or whether she had decided to take matters into her own hands. Either way, finding her had become his top priority. As he walked back through the palace corridors, Crawford noticed the subtle signs of tension among the staff. Word was beginning to spread that something serious was happening. Despite everyone's efforts to maintain secrecy, the royal household was like a small village, and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. Tomorrow's interviews with Sir Edward Young and John Warren would be crucial. If they could provide insight into Queen Elizabeth's final plans, they might be able to solve this case without a scandal. But if Angela Kelly had indeed stolen the jewelry, the royal family would face a crisis that could damage their reputation for years to come. Sir Edward Young arrived at Buckingham Palace at precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, as he had done almost every day for the past 15 years. Even though Queen Elizabeth was gone, his sense of duty and punctuality remained unchanged. He carried himself with the dignified bearing of a man who had served at the highest levels of government and understood the weight of royal secrets. Detective Crawford met him in the same investigation room where he had interviewed Queen Camilla the day before. Sir Edward appeared calm and composed, but Crawford could see the tension in his eyes. The former private secretary clearly understood the gravity of the situation. "Sir Edward, thank you for making yourself available on such short notice," Crawford began. "I'm sure you understand why I need to speak with you." "Indeed, Detective. The missing jewelry has the entire household quite concerned. Her late Majesty would be deeply troubled by this situation." Sir Edward's voice carried the refined accent of his Cambridge education and decades in diplomatic service. Crawford consulted his notes. "I understand you had a private meeting with Queen Elizabeth 3 weeks before her death, after which you spent 2 hours in the royal archives. Can you tell me about that?" Sir Edward was quiet for several moments, clearly wrestling with competing loyalties. "Detective, for 15 years I maintained absolute confidentiality regarding the Queen's private affairs. Even in death I feel bound by that trust. I understand your position, Sir Edward, but we're investigating the theft of invaluable royal jewelry. Any information you can provide might help us locate these pieces and protect the monarchy from scandal." Sir Edward sighed deeply and folded his hands on the table. "Very well. The Queen asked me to retrieve certain historical documents related to jewelry gifts within the royal family. Specifically, she wanted to research the provenance and gifting traditions of the Vladimir tiara, the diamond riviere necklace, and the flame lily brooch." Crawford felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the confirmation he needed. "She was researching those specific pieces?" "Yes. She was particularly interested in understanding the circumstances under which these pieces had been given as gifts to previous family members. The Queen was very concerned with precedent and proper protocol, even in her most personal decisions." "What did you find in the archives?" Sir Edward pulled a leather portfolio from his briefcase. "With your permission, I brought copies of the documents I found. The Queen had asked me to keep them for reference, though she never explained why." Crawford examined the papers. They detailed the history of each piece, including previous occasions when they had been gifted to new members of the royal family. The Vladimir tiara had been given to Princess Marina when she married Prince George in 1934. The diamond riviere necklace had been a wedding gift from Queen Mary to the Queen Mother. The flame lily brooch had been passed down through 3 generations of royal women. This establishes a clear precedent for gifting these pieces to new family members, Crawford observed. "Did the Queen give you any specific instructions about what to do with this research?" "She asked me to prepare a formal memorandum documenting the historical precedent for gifting these particular pieces. She said it would be needed when the time was right, but she didn't elaborate on what that meant." Crawford made detailed notes. "Sir Edward, did the Queen ever mention Queen Camilla in relation to this research?" The former private secretary shifted uncomfortably. "Not directly, but it was clear that her research was connected to the future of these pieces." The Queen had been giving considerable thought to how her jewelry collection would be distributed after her death. Did she seem to have any concerns about this distribution? Sir Edward was quiet for a long moment. Detective, the Queen was a woman of great wisdom and compassion, but she was also human. She had regrets about some aspects of her relationship with Queen Camilla. I believe she was trying to find a way to express her acceptance and approval posthumously. You think the missing jewelry pieces were her way of doing that? I do. The Queen understood symbols and gestures better than anyone. Giving Queen Camilla these particular pieces would have been a powerful statement of acceptance and trust. Crawford felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit together. Sir Edward, do you have any idea who the Queen might have entrusted with actually carrying out this gift? That's where I'm afraid I can't help you, Detective. The Queen compartmentalized her final arrangements very carefully. I was responsible for the historical research, but I wasn't involved in the logistics of actually moving or distributing the jewelry. An hour later, Crawford met with John Warren, the Queen's racing manager and longtime friend. Warren was a different type entirely from Sir Edward, more casual, more emotional, and clearly struggling with the loss of his royal friend. Detective, I have to tell you, this whole situation would break the Queen's heart, Warren said as they settled into the interview room. She loved those pieces, but more than that, she loved what they represented. Mr. Warren, can you tell me about your meeting with Queen Elizabeth 3 weeks before her death? Warren's eyes grew misty. She asked me to come see her, said she had something important to discuss. When I arrived, she seemed different, more emotional than usual. She told me she was worried about Queen Camilla, worried that people would never fully accept her. What did she ask you to do? She wanted me to help her plan a surprise. She said she had been thinking about ways to publicly demonstrate her support for Queen Camilla, and she had an idea that would send a clear message to the country and the Commonwealth. Crawford leaned forward. What kind of surprise? She wanted to arrange for Queen Camilla to wear specific pieces of jewelry at the next major state function. She said it would be her way of passing the torch, showing everyone that she had complete faith in Queen Camilla's ability to carry on royal traditions. The Vladimir tiara, the diamond Riviere necklace, and the flame lily brooch? Warren nodded. Exactly those pieces. She explained the history of each one, how they had been given to previous generations of royal women as symbols of acceptance and trust. She wanted Queen Camilla to have them permanently, but she also wanted the gesture to be public and meaningful. Mr. Warren, you spent 45 minutes in the safe room after your meeting with the Queen. What were you doing there? Warren looked uncomfortable. The Queen asked me to retrieve something for her. A small wooden box that contained some personal letters and documents related to these jewelry pieces. She said she wanted to include them with the gift so Queen Camilla would understand the full significance of what she was receiving. Do you know what happened to that box? I delivered it to Angela Kelly as the Queen requested. Angela was going to be responsible for the final arrangements. Crawford felt his pulse quicken. Once again, all roads led back to Angela Kelly. Did the Queen give you any specific instructions about timing or secrecy? She was very clear that this needed to remain absolutely confidential until after her death. She said she wanted Queen Camilla to be surprised, and she was worried that if word got out early, it might lose its impact or be misinterpreted by the media. Mr. Warren, when was the last time you spoke with Angela Kelly? Warren thought for a moment. About a week ago. She called to ask me some questions about the historical documents I had retrieved. She seemed nervous, worried about something, but she wouldn't tell me what was bothering her. Did she mention anything about the jewelry pieces themselves? Not directly, but she did ask me whether I thought the Queen's plan was still appropriate given that she had passed away. I told her that I believed the Queen's final wishes should be honored exactly as she had intended. Crawford closed his notebook, feeling that he now had a much clearer picture of what Queen Elizabeth had planned. The late Queen had orchestrated an elaborate posthumous gift for Queen Camilla, involving historical research, personal documents, and the 3 missing jewelry pieces. She had entrusted different aspects of this plan to different people, with Angela Kelly apparently responsible for the final execution. But something had gone wrong. Instead of Queen Camilla receiving her intended gift, the jewelry had disappeared and Angela Kelly had vanished. The question now was whether Angela had simply lost her nerve about carrying out the Queen's plan, or whether something more sinister had occurred. As Crawford left the palace that afternoon, He knew that finding Angela Kelly had become absolutely critical. She was the only person who could explain what had happened to Queen Elizabeth's carefully planned gesture of reconciliation. Without her, the mystery of the missing jewelry would remain unsolved, and the royal family would continue to live under the shadow of suspicion and scandal. The detective had one more lead to pursue. Angela Kelly's bank records had finally come through, and they showed some very interesting transactions in the days leading up to her disappearance. Angela Kelly sat in a small cafe in Edinburgh, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She had been hiding in Scotland for 3 days now, staying in a modest bed and breakfast under a false name. Every time she heard footsteps in the hallway or saw a police car on the street, her heart raced with panic. She knew they would be looking for her by now. The guilt was eating her alive. She had served Queen Elizabeth faithfully for over 20 years, and in the end, she had failed her most important task. The 3 jewelry pieces sat in a safety deposit box at a bank across town, exactly where the Queen had asked her to put them. But everything had gone wrong, and now she didn't know how to fix it. Angela pulled out her mobile phone and stared at the number for Buckingham Palace. She had written and deleted dozens of text messages over the past few days, trying to find the words to explain what had happened. But how could she explain that she had followed the Queen's instructions exactly, only to have those instructions lead to disaster? The truth was both simple and complicated. Queen Elizabeth had indeed planned to give the 3 jewelry pieces to Queen Camilla, but not immediately after her death. The Queen had wanted Angela to wait until Queen Camilla's first major state function as Queen Consort, then arrange for the pieces to be discovered in a way that would seem like a wonderful surprise. The Queen had even written specific instructions about how the gift should be presented, but those instructions had been lost in the chaos following the Queen's death. Angela had placed them in what she thought was a secure location in the Queen's private apartments, but when she went to retrieve them 2 weeks later, they were gone. Someone had cleaned out the Queen's personal papers, and the detailed plan for revealing the jewelry gift had disappeared with them. Without the instructions, Angela had panicked. She couldn't remember all the specific details the Queen had shared about timing and presentation. She was terrified of making a mistake that would dishonor the Queen's memory or embarrass Queen Camilla. So she had moved the jewelry pieces to a safety deposit box, hoping to buy herself time to figure out what to do. But then the monthly inventory had discovered the missing pieces, and suddenly Angela found herself at the center of a theft investigation. She knew that if she came forward now, she would have to explain why she had hidden the jewelry and why she had lost the Queen's instructions. It would look like incompetence at best, theft at worst. Angela's phone buzzed with another missed call from Commander Hayes. She had been avoiding the palace's calls for days, knowing that each hour of silence made her look more guilty, but she also knew that once she started talking, there would be no going back. Her mistake would become public, and the beautiful gesture Queen Elizabeth had planned would be ruined forever. Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, Detective Crawford was studying Angela Kelly's financial records with growing concern. 3 days before her disappearance, she had made a large cash withdrawal from her savings account, enough money to live comfortably for several months. She had also purchased a train ticket to Edinburgh using cash, clearly trying to avoid leaving an electronic trail. "Commander Hayes, this doesn't look good," Crawford said as they reviewed the evidence. "The financial activity suggests she was planning to disappear, and the timing coincides perfectly with the discovery of the missing jewelry." Patricia Hayes nodded grimly. "I've been hoping there was an innocent explanation, but Angela's behavior is becoming harder and harder to defend. Have we had any luck tracking her in Edinburgh? Local police are checking hotels and bed and breakfasts, but she's being very careful about staying off the radar. If she's using false identification, it could take weeks to find her." Crawford closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "Commander, based on everything we've learned about Queen Elizabeth's final plans, I'm starting to think Angela Kelly might have been trying to follow the Queen's instructions. But something went wrong." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Sir Edward confirmed that the Queen was researching these specific pieces for gifting purposes. John Warren confirmed that she was planning a surprise for Queen Camilla involving these pieces. Angela Kelly was supposed to be the one executing the final arrangements. What if she was just trying to carry out the Queen's wishes, but she lost track of the specific instructions? Commander Hayes considered this possibility. You think she hid the jewelry to protect it, not to steal it? It's possible. Maybe she was trying to buy time to figure out exactly what the Queen had wanted her to do. But when the pieces were discovered missing and a police investigation began, she panicked and ran. That would explain why she took money for an extended absence but didn't actually try to sell the jewelry or leave the country permanently. Crawford stood up and walked to the window. Commander, I think we need to change our approach. Instead of hunting Angela Kelly like a criminal, we need to reach out to her as someone who might need help. If she's hiding because she's ashamed or confused, not because she's guilty, then we need to give her a way to come forward safely. What do you suggest? A public statement. Not through the media, but through channels we know she'll see. We need to let her know that we understand she was trying to follow Queen Elizabeth's final wishes, and that we want to help her complete that mission. Commander Hayes looked skeptical. And if you're wrong? If she really did steal the jewelry? Then we're no worse off than we are now. But if I'm right, we might be able to solve this case without destroying an innocent woman's life or creating a scandal for the royal family. That evening, Commander Hayes sent a carefully worded message through the palace's internal communication channels, knowing that it would quickly reach the network of former royal staff who stayed in touch with each other. The message was simple. Angela Kelly was not considered a suspect, but rather someone who might have important information about Queen Elizabeth's final wishes regarding certain jewelry pieces. The palace wanted to speak with her to understand how they could honor those wishes appropriately. The message also included a direct phone number that Angela could call to speak privately with Detective Crawford, with assurances that the conversation would be confidential and that she would not be arrested or charged with any crime. In Edinburgh, Angela received word of the message through a friend who still worked at the palace. As she read the text, tears began streaming down her face. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, somehow, she could still make things right. But she also knew that calling that number would mean admitting her failure to carry out Queen Elizabeth's final wishes perfectly. It would mean revealing that she had lost the detailed instructions that the Queen had spent so much time preparing. It would mean disappointing the woman who had trusted her more than anyone else in the world. Angela walked to the window of her small room and looked out at the Edinburgh skyline. Queen Elizabeth had always taught her that doing the right thing was often more important than doing the perfect thing. Maybe it was time to stop trying to fix her mistakes in secret and start asking for help. She picked up her phone and dialed the number, her heart pounding as she waited for someone to answer. Detective Crawford was having dinner with his wife when his phone rang at 9:30 that evening. He almost didn't answer it, but something made him glance at the caller ID. It was the direct line he had given to Angela Kelly. Detective Crawford speaking, he said, stepping into the next room for privacy. Detective, this is Angela Kelly. Her voice was shaky and tired. I got your message. Crawford felt his pulse quicken. Angela, thank you for calling. Are you safe? Yes, I'm safe. But I need to tell you what really happened. I need to explain about the jewelry. I'm listening, Angela. Take your time. There was a long pause, and Crawford could hear her crying softly. Detective, I didn't steal those pieces. Her Majesty asked me to keep them safe until the right moment. She had such beautiful plans for Queen Camilla, such a wonderful surprise. But I've ruined everything. Over the next hour, Angela told Crawford the entire story. Queen Elizabeth had spent weeks planning an elaborate surprise for Queen Camilla's first major state function as Queen Consort. She wanted the 3 jewelry pieces to be presented as a gift during a special ceremony, with all the historical documents explaining their significance and the Queen's blessing for Queen Camilla to wear them. She wrote everything down, Detective. Every detail of how it should happen, what words should be used, even which photographers should be present to capture the moment. She wanted it to be perfect, wanted the whole world to see that she had complete faith in Queen Camilla. What happened to those instructions, Angela? I put them in the Queen's private writing desk for safekeeping. But after the funeral, when all of Her Majesty's personal effects were being sorted and distributed, the papers got mixed up with other documents. By the time I realized they were missing, they had already been sent to various archives and family members. I searched everywhere, but I couldn't find them. Crawford understood now why Angela had panicked. So you moved the jewelry to keep it safe while you tried to figure out what to do? Yes, I rented a safety deposit box and put the pieces there, along with the historical documents that Mr. Warren had retrieved. I thought if I could just remember all the details of Her Majesty's plan, I could still make it happen. But the more I tried to recall the specifics, the more confused I became. What if I got something wrong? What if I dishonored her memory? Angela, why didn't you just explain this to King Charles or Queen Camilla? Angela's voice broke. Because I was supposed to be the one person Her Majesty could rely on completely. For 20 years, she trusted me with her most personal affairs, and when she needed me most, I failed her. I lost the most important instructions she ever gave me. Crawford felt deep sympathy for the woman on the other end of the line. Angela, mistakes happen. What matters now is making sure Queen Elizabeth's wishes are honored. Are you willing to come back to London and help us do that? The jewelry is safe, Detective. I can give you the location of the safety deposit box, but I don't think I can face Queen Camilla or King Charles. I'm too ashamed of what I've done. Angela, I think you might be surprised by their reaction. They've been very worried about you. This whole investigation has made everyone realize how much Queen Elizabeth valued your loyalty and service. 2 days later, Angela Kelly sat in the same room where Detective Crawford had interviewed Queen Camilla earlier that week. But this time, both King Charles and Queen Camilla were present along with Commander Hayes and Detective Crawford. Angela looked fragile and exhausted, but she held herself with the dignity that had characterized her years of royal service. Angela, King Charles said gently, we're so relieved that you're safe. We've been very concerned about you. Queen Camilla leaned forward, her eyes kind but curious. Angela, Detective Crawford has explained some of what happened, but we'd like to hear it from you. What did my mother-in-law plan for these jewelry pieces? Angela took a deep breath and began to tell the story of Queen Elizabeth's final gesture of love and acceptance. She described how the Queen had researched the historical significance of each piece, how she had wanted the presentation to be a public affirmation of Queen Camilla's place in the royal family, and how carefully she had planned every detail. She was so excited about it, Your Majesty. She said it would be her way of telling the world that you were not just King Charles's wife, but a true queen in your own right. She wanted everyone to see that she had chosen to pass these pieces to you personally. Queen Camilla's eyes filled with tears. She really felt that way? Oh yes, Your Majesty. In her final weeks, she spoke about you often. She said she had come to understand how difficult your position had been, and she admired your strength and dedication. She wanted to make sure that history would record her approval of you. King Charles reached over and took his wife's hand. Mother always had a way of surprising us, didn't she? Detective Crawford pulled out the safety deposit box keys that Angela had given him. Your Majesties, would you like to retrieve the jewelry pieces now? Angela can show us exactly what Queen Elizabeth had planned. An hour later, they stood in the bank vault as Angela opened the metal box. Inside were the 3 missing pieces, carefully wrapped in royal blue velvet, along with the historical documents and a smaller box containing additional letters. There's one more thing, Angela said softly. Her Majesty wrote individual letters to go with each piece of jewelry. She wanted Queen Camilla to understand not just the history, but the personal significance of each gift. Queen Camilla opened the first letter with trembling hands. It was written in Queen Elizabeth's careful script and began, My dear Camilla, by the time you read this, I will be gone, but my love for Charles and my respect for you will remain forever. As Queen Camilla read aloud, everyone in the room was moved by Queen Elizabeth's words of acceptance, gratitude, and blessing. The late Queen had acknowledged the difficulties of the past and expressed her genuine hope that Queen Camilla would find joy and fulfillment in her royal role. Angela, Queen Camilla said through her tears, you didn't fail Queen Elizabeth. You protected her gift and made sure it reached me safely. That's exactly what she would have wanted. King Charles nodded in agreement. Angela, Mother's plan may not have unfolded exactly as she envisioned, but the love and intention behind it are just as powerful. Perhaps even more so, because we now understand how much thought and care she put into this gesture. Detective Crawford watched as the royal family embraced Angela Kelly, welcoming her back into their circle of trust. The case was officially closed, but more importantly, Queen Elizabeth's final wish had been fulfilled. The missing jewelry hadn't been stolen at all. It had been a gift of love that took a little longer to reach its intended recipient. 3 months later, At her first major state banquet as queen consort, Queen Camilla wore all 3 pieces of jewelry that Queen Elizabeth had chosen for her. The Vladimir tiara caught the light magnificently. The diamond Riviere necklace sparkled against her evening gown, and the flame lily brooch rested over her heart. As photographers captured the moment and the world watched, Queen Camilla knew that she was wearing more than just beautiful jewelry. She was wearing the final blessing of her predecessor, a symbol of acceptance that transcended their complicated past and pointed toward a future of healing and hope. Angela Kelly, reinstated to her position with the royal household, watched from the staff area with tears of joy in her eyes. Queen Elizabeth's plan had finally come to fruition, and the gift of love had reached its intended destination at exactly the right moment.